1966. A year sporting greats were made. Football came home as England won the Men's World Cup. Jack Nicklaus completed the golf career Grand Slam with his first Open Championship title. And Billie Jean King became the Queen of Wimbledon, the first of her 12 Grand Slam successes. In Formula One, the world champion that year was Australia's Jack Brabham, but it was the year an even more enduring legacy was born, as a fellow Antipodean, already familiar to motorsport fans as a driver, first entered his own outfit in the championship. And now the team that Bruce McLaren gave his name to is celebrating its 1000th race in Formula One. Bruce McLaren Motor Racing debuted in Formula One at the 1966 Monaco Grand Prix. Sadly, he died 4 years later in a testing crash, aged just 32. But the team that still bears his name has gone on to achieve remarkable success, having put some of F1's best drivers ever behind the wheel of its cars over the decades. McLaren Racing is only the second team to reach 1,000 races after Ferrari. For Bruce's daughter, Amanda, this is an immense source of pride.
We are the second oldest Formula One team on the grid. The fact that we still exist and the name has remained the same over the years, I know my father would be incredibly proud of that.
Amanda, who now lives back in New Zealand, was just 4 years old when her father died. She has no memories of him herself, but because he was so well loved and respected by his peers, their stories have painted a picture of what her father was like, not just as a racer, but also as a man.
I actually do remember the evening of June the 2nd when he was killed, because I went to some friend's house and was given a doll set. And I can remember thinking, why have I been given this toy? It's not my birthday and it's not Christmas. But I was unaware of what had happened that day. But what I'm very fortunate to have is all the people that did know him and speak so very, very fondly of him. There are still members of his team alive today that I often catch up with when we're in the UK, and also some here in New Zealand. The film footage, the books, the archives. So although I never really knew him, I feel like over the years I've been very fortunate to get to know him.
Bruce took his team's first win before his death, but he sadly didn't live long enough to see the outfit become world champions for the first time. That happened in 1974, when Brazil's Emerson Fittipaldi, signed from Lotus, won his second title.
Emerson does fully justify that word that is overused in our sport, and indeed all sport. He is a legend. I mean, he won 14 Grand Prix and 2 World Championships. He won more than that, Indy car races, 20-something, and the Indy 500 twice and the Indy Championship once. As a man, he has enormous grace, is what I would use to describe him. He's a brilliant driver, obviously, and was a brilliant driver. But a beautiful person in the way that he treats people.
2 years after Fittipaldi's triumph came the battle between good friends James Hunt and Niki Lauda, which was huge enough to make Hollywood notice, the pair of them depicted in the 2013 film Rush. Lauda, driving for Ferrari, had already come back from a near-fatal crash earlier that season, when he pulled out of the final race in Japan, deeming the conditions unsafe, and McLaren's Hunt took the title. But it was in the 1980s that McLaren truly established themselves as the top team in Formula One. A merger with Formula 2 and 3 outfit Project 4 Racing saw Ron Dennis take charge.
We sort of joke, but it could well have been changed to Ron Dennis Racing because he had 100% ownership at one point there. And, you know, for a little while we were sort of Mercedes McLaren, but the McLaren part has always stuck.
A switch to Porsche engines propelled McLaren back to the top, and Lauda, having joined the team, became its third world champion in 1984. And Alain Prost joined the list, winning the 85 and 86 titles to become the first to win multiple championships as a McLaren driver. But 1988 was the standout year, and to this day remains McLaren's most successful Formula One season ever. The Honda-powered MP44 car won all but one of the races held, as Prost and his new teammate Ayrton Senna blew the rest of the grid away.
But I do remember watching in the 80s, of course, once I'm, getting into karting at 11 and, having, posters of the McLaren on my bedroom wall. I personally was always somehow a little bit more drawn towards Prost as a driver. I think very smooth, and, Ayrton was obviously the benchmark driver of any era, but certainly of that era.
Senna won the first round of that duel by 3 points, but things soured in their second season together. Prost felt that Honda's engineers preferred Senna, and the pair of them had several high-profile incidents on track. Perhaps the most infamous came at that year's Japanese Grand Prix when they crashed, handing Prost the title. 12 months later, by which point Prost was racing for Ferrari, Senna returned the favour by deliberately driving into him on the first lap at Suzuka.
Some of the biggest moments from the 76 year of Formula One come from Prost and Senna, whether as teammates or, of course, when Alain went to Ferrari and Ayrton famously said before the race, if I'm not ahead going into the first corner, then neither of us are coming out. It was a different time, and they both walked away, and it stays in the memory, and it's fed to the next generation. So that's the great thing about those guys and those iconic moments at McLaren, of these biggest names in the history of the sport, the multiple world champions going toe to toe, will live beyond my lifetime.
Senna's departure, a switch to Ford engines, and the emergence of Benetton and their hotshot driver Michael Schumacher saw McLaren's star fade in the mid-1990s, but they were back on top before the end of the decade, with Mika Hakkinen taking back-to-back titles ahead of Ferrari, Schumacher in '98 and Eddie Irvine the following year, after the German's season-ending injury. David Coulthard was the Flying Finn's teammate.
Mika was fantastically fast, in terms of outright speed. I definitely would put Mika there as one of the quickest of his generation. I think Michael's strength was, not only was he fast, but he was so consistent. But look, impossible to prove, but certainly there was comparisons with Michael and Mika in Formula 3. I think that although Mika only has 2 world championships to his name, Michael himself said that he was the driver that he feared of that era. And I would argue in my book, not because I was his teammate, but just observing, if they were both in the same car, then in a head-to-head, I think Mika would come out in front in terms of qualifying. But I think we have to acknowledge that Michael's strength was in Grand Prix racing.
DC finished as runner-up in the championship in 2001, but that was the period that would be wholly dominated by Schumacher and Ferrari. His 13 Grand Prix victories put him second on the all-time list of race winners without a title, behind only Stirling Moss, though he feels he could have done more had he not been on the receiving end of some team orders.
I didn't stop racing because I didn't want to take the risk. I stopped racing because I'd done it. I couldn't have, I'd reached the best that I could do, and those guys on the day were just a bit better. So I know I moved over for Damon and I moved over for Mika, and I know that I blew up while leading a few Grand Prix. So whatever 13 wins is not a reflection of the amount of chances that I had or the amount of races that I finished, but it is what it is. You get a team order, you've got to take it.
After DC left for the newly arrived Red Bull team, McLaren had a strong 2005 season, with 10 victories scored, but Fernando Alonso and Renault would win the next 2 titles after Schumacher. It was in 2007, when they signed the Spaniard and a young British upstart named Lewis Hamilton, that they found themselves back in contention. But for all the promise that year held, it would turn out to be probably the most controversial year in McLaren's Formula One history. Alonso came into the team as a double world champion, expecting to be the undisputed number 1 driver, but Hamilton hit the ground running in F1, with podiums in each of his first 5 races and a maiden win in the 6th. The relationship between the two sides of the garage deteriorated as the season went on, and in the end, they scored the exact same number of points and were beaten to the driver's title by Kimi Räikkönen. It was also the year of the Spygate scandal, when it emerged that a Ferrari employee had given confidential information about their car to a friend who worked for McLaren.
Such a dream start to the season, this is turning into something of a nightmare for McLaren. Bosses here will fly to Paris on the 26th of July to answer the FIA's charges. And if they're found guilty, it could have a devastating effect on McLaren's campaign this season.
It was discovered when the McLaren engineer's wife took the documents to a local photocopy shop, and the owner alerted Ferrari. Ron Dennis initially denied that McLaren had known about the espionage.
People just got together and exchanged information. Now, these people deny doing that, but it does look like, from McLaren's point of view, if we believe what they're saying, they had nothing to do with that. And if that's the case, then really they have a good defence against the FIA charges.
But although they were initially cleared, a second hearing established that other members of the team had also held the information, and so McLaren were fined $100 million and thrown out of the Constructors' Championship. Alonso left at the end of the year, and Heikki Kovalainen was hired as his replacement. When Matt Bishop was asked by Dennis to join as head of communications in early 2008, he found a team in a very fragile state.
But the atmosphere when I arrived was one of defensive pessimism. And that's because the year before, 2007, had been McLaren's annus horribilis. Let's be honest, McLaren had gone quite close to the brink. And actually, Max Mosley, who was the FIA president, had wanted the punishment to be harsher still. He had wanted McLaren to be completely excluded from Formula One for a year, for the 2008 season, which would have been a far worse punishment, because all the sponsors would have gone. They'd have said, well, we're not going to pay, we're not going to sponsor you because you're not racing, our logos are not being seen. The drivers would have left. The senior or capable staff of any kind in any discipline would have left. There wouldn't have been the money to run the factory. There wouldn't have been a reason to run the factory. No cars would have been built. McLaren would have come to an end. That would have been the end of McLaren. So scarred is absolutely the word, and terrified. They'd been through, I mean, I was a new recruit, but some of the people who'd been there for some years thought that their whole dream, was coming to an end. And then we went down to Melbourne for the first Grand Prix of 2008, and having feared that the team might not exist, we won. And Lewis Hamilton won for McLaren, beating everyone else, including what was then the sworn enemy, Ferrari. And I've never seen so many grown men cry in a paddock before.
Hamilton dramatically beat Felipe Massa to the driver's title on the last corner of the final race of the year, but there would be no building on it for 2009, as that was the year of the fairy tale Brawn GP story. Honda had quit F1 suddenly at the end of 2008, and nobly, to save the team, new McLaren boss Martin Whitmarsh waived his team's exclusive right to use Mercedes engines to allow the Brawn team to compete. They won the title, with Jenson Button becoming world champion, and Mercedes bought the Brawn team to set up their own works outfit. McLaren hired Button to partner Hamilton in 2010, and while they formed a strong all-British lineup, no more title glory would follow, and Hamilton chose to join Mercedes for 2013. It was seen as a massive risk at the time, but it turned out to be a genius call, as he went on to add 6 more drivers' titles. McLaren's trajectory was more downward, as wins dried up and a return to Honda engines yielded nothing even close to the success the two brands had previously enjoyed. Alonso returned to drive for the team, with Hamilton gone and Dennis leaving, but even points finishes were hard to come by at times, and he famously slammed the GP2 engine he was saddled with. The relationship between McLaren and Honda was strained, and it was an impossible situation for Bishop, still head of communications, to handle.
Not my finest hour professionally, I would now reluctantly concede. I think the thing is, it was very difficult to have any kind of positive control over, because the relationship between McLaren and Honda was bad. I lost control of the narrative, partly because people senior to me didn't particularly want the narrative to be positive about Honda. They wanted the media to blame Honda in order to avoid the blame themselves. And once you get into that, that's not a good way of running a team.
McLaren spent years marooned in the midfield, and they were there when they promoted young British talent Lando Norris into his first F1 seat in 2019, partnered by Carlos Sainz. A handful of podiums and a 2021 win for Daniel Ricciardo at Monza was as good as it got, until midway through the 2023 season, which had started horribly, but saw Norris or Oscar Piastri get onto most podiums from Silverstone onwards. The following year, the long wait for a constructors' title was ended, when the first crown since 1998 was secured. They followed it up with Norris's first championship success in 2025, and they head into their big 1000th race milestone riding high once more, under the leadership of Chief Executive Zak Brown and Team Principal Andrea Stella.
They've got a core of good people there. You know, you could argue that they were in a period of difficulty for a period of time, you know, with some of the choices they made, but they're 100% back on track.
I think, you know, what has been achieved over the last few years is phenomenal, and we are in such a strong position now in terms of the future. You know, an entry into WEC next year as well, Zach wanting the Triple Crown. You know, we've become leaders again in Formula One, very established now in the Indy Series, and you know, the WEC Series next year is going to be really exciting.
And given her father, Bruce, started everything when it comes to the McLaren Formula One team, it seems only right that his daughter, Amanda, has the final word, with a message to Zak Brown, Andrea Stella, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and all the men and women who make up the McLaren F1 team as we see it today.
When we started winning, I'd send them an email and say, you know, Dad would be so proud. And Andrea would often come back and say, it gives me goosebumps to hear you talk about your father. And I just, every time I see them, thank them for what they've done to continue my father's legacy and get the team back at the front where we should be. So I would just say it again, to Lando and Oscar, you're just both lovely young men. You're great drivers. Lando, you've got a championship. Oscar, you will definitely have one in the future. Keep driving those cars as fast as you possibly can. But stay lovely young men. And to the whole team, you know, it is a team sport, and everybody at McLaren Technology Centre and beyond is a crucial part of what happens to get the car on the grid to race that Sunday afternoon. And so to everybody at McLaren Technology Centre and beyond, thank you for all that you do with my father's name attached to it.